On this video, we're going to paint a BMW, one of the classic BMW gas tanks and side covers, using a very special BMW custom mixed paint that has a lot of silver pigment in it, a lot of sparkle. It's going to have to be covered by several coats of clear, and we're going to try to show our thin coat technology that we use to build up the clear. When you have a paint that has that much, and here it is when it's finished, that much sparkle in it, that much the pigment, there's a little bit of pearl in this paint, and of course anything BMW, we want this to be a perfect match to what the original paint was. So it's a big job. Let's get started. Just for anybody new to the channel, on a previous video we did the complete prep, the sanding, the Bondo work, the filling, the priming, the sanding, the primer, and got this all ready for the day we're going to use today to do the pigment. Now, as anybody knows who's painted anything recently, the price of paint has skyrocketed through the moon. Paint I needed for my MT-09 was $309 a quart. I don't know what Pokey paid for this paint, but it wasn't cheap, I guarantee you that. And this is a very unique color because it's got a lot of pigment in it. Any silver paint normally would just have silver pigment and clear. This is not that kind of a color. It's got pearlescent in it, and it's got big flakes. Now the silver flakes that go into silver paint, every one is a little bit different. If you go look at silver cars, some have real sparkles in them and some are kind of just muted down. This is a really sparkly color. Now that means a couple of things. We're going to have to stir this paint, shake it, stir it, keep it stirred while it's in the spray gun, and be very careful we don't build up anything like zebra striping or one spot being darker than the other. So the first part of this whole job, as always, is, and this will be a 50-50 mix with mid-temp thinner, and we're going to try to use the smaller gun. I always like to use the smaller gun because the way I like to paint all of my motorcycle parts is with a lot of thin coats, not one big heavy coat. When you try to do everything in one coat, what typically can be a problem is you get zebra striping, number one, or you can get areas that are darker when you take it out in the sun. One side's darker than the other. It's very difficult. If you do a lot of light coats, what you do is you stack the deck in your favor that may not happen. Now in this case, this paint has to be mixed. I'll mix it in a glass jar, 50-50 with thinner, mid-temp thinner, and then strain it, really strain it to make sure there's no lumps or anything in it that's going to clog up the gun, because when you paint silver, you will see every single mistake, every little flaw. Now, a couple of golden rules I have for painting. The first thing is, if you have several parts to paint, always paint the smallest part first. The reason is, if we would have a problem with the spray gun, number one, or a clog, or something that I needed to put more thinner in the paint as an example, or something, I want to do it on the smallest part. I don't want to do it on the biggest part. I always save the biggest part for last. Now, I put a lot of this in fast forward just to make the video not as long as it would normally be. You can see the sparkle in this paint. You can see how big the flakes are. And what that means is we're going to have to bury that in clear. What this means is one thin coat of clear is not going to seal that up. It's going to take several coats. But the trick you don't want to fall into the trap of trying to bury that in one big or two big thick coats of clear. I want several coats of clear, one right after another. Now with the silver, this required several coats, one right after another, and I try to do them roughly, I always say a cup of coffee apart, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and depending on the temperature, and if you're doing it in a spray booth, of course it could go a lot faster if you have a heated spray booth. What you don't want to see, the way I'm painting this, back and forth, then up and down, up and down. I don't want to do it all in one direction. I don't want to have zebra striping. And that's true of the clear too, because I'm stressing over and over again, the thing to avoid is to try to paint this the way you paint a car. Now you're going up and down, up and down, up and down. And that's, at this point, we even have some zebra striping there. Though side to side, then on a 45-degree angle, back and forth, anywhere you see zebra striping, and do it in thin coats, not in one big giant coat. That is the best trick I can share with you. And no matter what, that silver is going to require a ton of clear. And at this point, I just want it to be as silver as possible and no zebra striping if possible. And let it dry overnight. Now it's going to dry in a garage overnight. If we had a heated area and we were going to bring this in the house, and my routine is to let it dry 24 hours out in a garage that's ambient temperature this time of the year. It's probably around 50 degrees. But that paint, at this point in time, that paint really looked beautiful. But I know it's going to look even nicer with the clear. But if I rush the clear and try to get it on in big, thick coats, I'm going to lose that really nice glossy effect. So while I was waiting for that to dry, I cleaned up all the hardware, cleaned up the screws, did a little work on the gas cap, went out, double-checked everything was perfect, because before I take the silver out of the gun, I want to make sure everything is exactly the way I want it. And I want that paint to gas off. Now, if it was really, really cold and we were in the middle of the winter or a snowy day, I would let it even outgas even an extra day or 2 days, and then bring it down by a heating vent and let it dry. Now, over the years, I've used several different brands of 4:1 urethane universal clear. Gavco makes a good one. 5 Star is another good one. I haven't found any that are really terrible. They all seem to be good. The trick is, for me, under my shop conditions, the big thing is fast hardener. Not medium, not slow. Fast hardener. No matter which brand of clear you use, always get the fast hardener. And what that does, it'll keep the part from becoming flypaper for an extra amount of time, and it'll be a much better glossy surface. So when I did the final mix of the clear, I used the big gun. Usually I would not use the big gun, but for this part, I'm going to use low air pressure and using the gun so I can put light, thin coats on. Now, the reason for using the big gun, it'll just fan out a little bit better than the small gun. And actually, if I wanted to, I could probably have used this as the gun to do the silver. But in my case, it doesn't matter. I've got 15, 20 guns in the shop at all times. But the thing to do now is don't use a gun that's had red paint in it a couple days before, because you're going to see everything in silver. So now the fun actually begins. Again, I'm starting with the smallest part. I've got the gun fanned out as much as I possibly can, realistically. Low air pressure. And I want to see that first coat of silver go on there. I want to see this in real time before I actually make any more decisions as to how I want to paint the tank. The first coat went on beautiful, but you can see how ripply it is, the orange peel in there, because we have big flakes in the silver. And that's why right now, if you try to just blow on more clear and more clear and more clear before this first coat tacks out, you run the risk you're going to have runs, or the edges are going to be all bubbly. It's not going to be a high quality job. I wanted this to be as high quality as I could make it. Now notice the color of the silver changed too. When you put the clear on, it got a little bit lighter. So there's a lot of things. Now we want an exact match so that this bike looks like what Pokey wants it to look like. And he paid all this money for the paint, so I really want him to have exactly what he wants. So I've really been careful and fussy about getting it to this point, but always doing a smaller part first and looking at it before and after. I know we're going to have a little bit of a color change. Looking at it out in the bright sun, I know, and typically with any silver, it's going to change color just a little bit from the first coat of clear to the second to the third. And the more clear you put on it, it's going to tend to get glossier, and the color is going to be deeper. So, but the biggest tip here is in my case, I wanted to get all the side cover work done before I approached the tank and get a feel for just how many coats of clear I was going to need. In this case, it looked like I was going to need at least 3, maybe 4, but just putting it on one thin coat at a time. Not 2 thick coats, one thin coat at a time, way better. So by the time I got actually to put paint on a tank, I was pretty confident that we were going to have exactly the color we wanted, because if we didn't, well, this would be a good time to stop so you don't have to strip all that paint off the tank. But the color turned out absolutely perfect, and when Pokey picked this job up, he was just over the moon happy with the color. And at this point in time, I know that I'm not going to get away with putting 1 or 2 coats of clear, so I planned out the day so that I would have nice 20 and 30 minute gaps. I could get the first coat on, let it dry 20 minutes, half an hour, put the second coat on. Again, I put a lot of this in fast forward. Wanted to get underneath as much as possible, because that's really, realistically, that's the part of the tanks that seem to rust out, but they rust out from the inside. It's just nicer if you can get the paint on the bottom first, and this way you can work on the top of the tank separately. And I know it takes a lot of patience to put thin coats on, because everybody wants to see it done. Now, I remember at this point in the day, I called Karen outside to look at that color in the sunshine, and it just looked beyond good. We were all happy with the color. And the problem is, it's not always exactly what you want. Sometimes it's a little darker, a little lighter, but that was so nice when it was done. But we still have this issue that we have to deal with. This is a big flake paint. It's going to need a lot of clear, and I want it to go on in thin coats, and I want a half-hour dry time, even 20 minutes if I was rushing, but I'm not rushing. So it's basically going to eat up the better part of a day if we put 4 or 5 coats of clear on, and then leave a half-hour gap in between a lunch break and a couple of coffee breaks. But that's the only way to get a lot of clear on in one shot. If you try to do it again, and I've tried so many times to just paint like you're painting a car or a railroad train, never works for me anyway. Now, by the time I was letting 1 coat on a tank, gas off, I could get what I hope is going to be one of the final coats on the side covers, get a look at how that's going to look with, and I think if I remember right, this went five coats, but it just needs a lot of clear. This is one of the unique paints that needed a lot of clear. If this were just a color without the sparkles in it, would have needed a lot less. But look at the final result. And when I got done with that, and I just can't tell you how happy I was with the way that laid out, and it just couldn't have been nicer. That really was, I call it thin coat technology. That's my own little phrase. And again, I have tried, and many times, and I do have big spray guns, and I have painted cars, and I have painted guitars and boat engines and God knows drums and everything, that it's appropriate. But it always seems to me like the rules for painting motorcycle parts are many thin coats. It always seems to work better for me. That's just me. I'm sure people that have a professional body shop where they have control of temperature and the climate and everything. Now, one final thing, the reason we use fast hardener on all of these, because we want it to harden up between coats a little bit, but I don't want it to cure overnight. So the whole thing is I'd like to get all the clear on in one day. That's ideal if you can do it. Not 100% necessary, but it's better. I'm going back and forth, up and down, each coat, being really careful not to miss any spots. Have the fan adjusted as wide as possible. That seems to help a little bit. It's just at some point in time, you just have to be patient. It's just hard to even imagine how much patience you need at the very end, because you really want to see this, and the sun is shining here, and I really wanted to see it, but patience always pays. And as you get the final coats on and the sun is setting in the west, you realize it took the better part of a day to do this, but the end result is, hey, I don't even have to mention what it is. Just look, and now you can see that the sparkles in the paint, the clear, how it laid down, the color match, just couldn't be nicer. Absolutely beautiful. And again, this is just a lot of patience and, of course, a true labor of love. And for me, it's a very rewarding thing at the end of the day to look at the labor of love and all the work that went into this. And I think the result speaks for itself. When this bike is assembled and put together and sitting out at one of the meetups, I'll be very proud of it. That paint laid down beautiful. But again, I say it so many times, I get sick of saying it. The thing I've learned over the years is not try to paint it like a car. Don't try to paint it in one coat. It's just high-risk poker. The way I'm painting, it takes a lot more time, but there's very little risk that you're going to get a run or anything is going to go wrong. And it allows you, in the end, to paint paints like this that are very difficult to paint. The big flake paints are really difficult sometimes. So I hope in the course of watching this video that you've picked up some good tips. The object of our channel is to share useful information. I've been painting over 60 years. I've learned everything I know the hard way, and I am so happy when I can share this with somebody who really has a passion for doing this kind of work. And not everybody does, and some people would just rather bring it to a body shop. I understand that, but thin coat technology is really a good thing if you're painting motorcycle parts. And as I always say, the end speaks for itself. At the end of every one of these videos, there's some pretty nice looking stuff sitting on the shelf. And I always celebrate by going out and doing a power wheelie. And thanks so much for watching.